Everyone at one time or another is intrigued by their family history and where they came from. I had such an interest growing up because my family would tell me a great many stories about their parents' families and even further back. I was fascinated by the stories of how my family came to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, how we came from Switzerland, why we enjoy our cheese and sauerkraut so much, and why our heritage is said to be along the lines of nobility. I wanted to learn what would inspire someone to travel so far, build so much, and do so much for others. John Kunz II is responsible for bringing my family the gospel, bringing them to a land where they have only prospered, and has left behind a legacy to be fulfilled in every step of his descendants. My great-great-grandfather, John Kunz II, was one of the greatest leaders that I know of. John Kunz II was born in Dimpingen, Switzerland, and was part of a large family with a very long history in the country. His family had spent many years as cheesemakers, builders, carpenters, cobblers, tailors, dairymen, and sauerkraut makers. All this within the beautiful landscapes of Switzerland. The family had built a great many homes in the sovereignty of Bern, especially in the borough of Dimpingen. It had hosted many generations of Kunzes and was filled with history from the time that Bern became capital of Switzerland to many different historical events in the country, like the Battle of Grauhals. John Kunz II was not a man to be forced into anything. He questioned everything and was also known to have a temper, which has continued on the Kunz line even today. He didn't like it when people hurt each other, disrespected him or those he loved, and he would fight against anything he felt was wrong. His father, John, as Kunz I, invited Willard Richards, a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to enter his home and to teach his family. At first, John was reluctant, was obstinate, and hated the man and his companion and everything that they stood for. His most recent experiences with Mormons and the missionaries in the area had left him with a bitter and foul taste in his mouth. In time, his family, however, accepted the missionaries. His wife, Rosina Canuti at the time, as well as his parents and their children, accepted the missionaries into the home on a regular basis to be taught and to learn from them. John Kunz took time. Through many days and trials of skepticism, he learned more about the Mormons and more about the missionaries that were entering his home. He spent time trying to understand more of what they were teaching and why. The more he learned, the more he came to accept their message, which was of Christ, into his life, and he was then baptized into the LDS faith. This was when his entire life changed, and he began the road to becoming a great leader. In 1862, Brigham Young, the prophet of the church at the time, asked for all able-bodied saints worldwide to attend him in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States of America, if they felt so prompted and were capable of doing so. John Kunz II was reluctant to heed the call. It would require him to travel over 2,000 miles from his home that had many, many years of ancestry and history in it. Many of the homes that his family had built, a church house that had been built by his family that had stained glass coat of arms denoting their heritage and how long they had been present in the valley. This was just the beginning of testing his faith, however. He had grown in his faith in many ways, but this was the true trial that would teach him the most. He knew that he would be blessed for being obedient to the call of the prophet. He packed up his wife and few children at the time and traveled to Utah. He was told by many, his family especially, that he shouldn't leave. Even his own father suggested that he stay there where he was and do the best that he could. He wrote at one point that he knew that he wouldn't become any better of a man by not obeying what the prophet asked him to do. His friends had told him and had warned him that he shouldn't leave. It was a fool's errand, and that he or his family would reach that valley in worse condition now than they would if they would just stay where they were in Dimpingen Bern. He wouldn't heed these answers. He wouldn't heed these bits of advice. and his family wouldn't either. They traveled many miles, across the ocean, across the plains, through desert. They traveled through snowstorms and through rain. They finally made it to the Salt Lake Valley after a long and arduous journey. He and several others met with the prophet at that time. The prophet instructed them that their journey was not yet done, that they needed to travel even further. He asked them to travel a few hundred miles north to a place called Bear Lake, a territory at the time, but somewhere that was farther from where they were planning on staying. Once again, his faith was tested. He knew that if he disobeyed or didn't heed the call, that he would not receive the blessings that he could so have if he were to follow the prophet. Keeping in mind, however, that Bear Lake Valley was and is known to have an average of 3 feet of snow yearly, at least, and winter lasts about 9 months of the year. Planting crops is one of the most difficult occupations in the valley, and would be difficult to raise a family and have any kind of prosperous living. This was an almighty difficult command for him to ask of the people. Brigham Young knew it, but he did it because he knew it was right, and they did it because they knew he was right, especially after they had just traveled thousands of miles just to meet with him. Nevertheless, many agreed to obey, and the party traveled north, settling in Bear Lake Valley. John Kunz was commanded to build a dairy and practice his trade of making cheese upon reaching their destination. By this time, John Kunz II's family had grown. There was a few more children involved, and it was much more difficult to make the journey. Make it they did, however. Upon arrival, many of the members of the traveling party settled various areas of the valley: Geneva, Liberty, Montpelier, Paris, Ovid, Williamsburg. The Kunzes, however, decided they were going to settle right in the middle. It was very similar to where they had come from in Bern, Switzerland. The family didn't have much difficulty in settling in. Several members of the party began other foundations, businesses, trading posts, and connecting up with the railroad in the local area. In honor of their new home, John Kunz II named their home Bern. He founded a dairy there and went a few miles north to Williamsburg to found a factory for cheese making, as he was asked to do. John Kunz wanted to provide a future for the generations to come that would be wholesome and fruitful. His vision was a valley where his family could prosper, grow, learn, and become fulfilled. He knew the only way to go about this was to teach the best things. A strong mind can build a strong future. He founded a school in Bern, calling for the teachers and children in the valley to attend. He built it with his own hands, using only his family as help. He built the schoolhouse and helped keep it in good shape when he wasn't working with cows and cheese. He also knew that faith and religion were a strong foundation for the growing mind. He had studied a great deal and found wisdom in his studies of his own that he had passed on to his family and began to share with others. He imparted his knowledge to whoever he could. The valley began to prosper in many ways. Trade goods, dairies, mining, factories, and many other industries were established therein. The Kunz family was a great part of this being in a central position where they were in Bern, where all goods and people would generally pass on an average daily basis. A few years after Bern was settled, John was set apart as a stake president, which meant that he was responsible for every LDS person in the surrounding towns within the valley and those who were not members of the church. He was to ensure their welfare, their security, and he was responsible for the progression and spirituality of each individual in the valley. He would visit the widows, provide assistance to the impoverished and underprivileged, and was a servant to everyone regardless of what they believed or where they were from. He was a great example of obedience, faith, and industry. His example encouraged others to do better in their actions as well. Having the factory and dairy, John used them to better teach others what they would need to know to progress further in this life. A person can learn a great deal from working with cows and making cheese. If you want to know what someone is really like, herd cattle with them. John taught his family and others in the valley that worked at these places how to make a living. how to be industrious, to be team-oriented, and how to put their trust in God. He taught life lessons to the children as they experienced a great many different scenarios working in these settings. He provided employment, priceless tutelage, and a means of support for families in the valley. John Kunz had many children, but one of these was John Kunz III, who would later recount how his father was one of the greatest examples of a model life within the valley. John Kunz II is a legend of the Kunz family. He served a mission, leaving his several children and his wife at home. He fathered several children, married 3 times. He served faithfully after his conversion within the LDS Church. He built everything he could for the generations that came after, solely for their benefit and progression, asking for nothing in return except for what joy can be obtained in this life with his family. He left behind a legacy that is only partially realized today. Part of that legacy is a family that strives to continue to follow John Kunz's example of being brave, wise, faithful, standing for what is true, and serving others. There are stories that are passed down through generations about the man John Kunz was. His son, John Kunz III, again would later recount how he had met Willard Richards, the missionary, who had visited and taught his father's family, in Switzerland, and thanked him for what he had done for the entire family by bringing the message that he had to his father. This so inspired the whole family to follow the prophet and come to the Bear Lake Valley where they would prosper so. John Kunz II was and is an inspiration to everyone who knows him. He was a rare breed of leader, but one that if everyone were to emulate, there would be a great deal more joy to be found in this world. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.